So I had this bug come in, started as a tune-up. Hey, just a quick tune-up. You know, I usually about 3.5 hours time I had allotted for this job to do a tune-up on it. It shows up on a tow truck, and it's never a good sign because that means it's a no run, and it was not running when it first showed up. Found a kill switch on the ignition, got it to fire up, and even when it fired up, barely ran at all. I mean, it was pluming out black smoke. It couldn't rev past 2,000 RPM. Just an absolute mess. It's got a CB crankfire ignition that I do not have a laptop with the software in it. So now I'm going to start looking into it. I look at the way it's wired, and of course there was a sale on red wire that day because every wire is red. It's absolute insanity. Color coded VWs, and we should all be using it when we wire on cars. Red would be constant, black is keyed, brown is going to be your grounds. Sorry about that rant. Then we decided we were going to kind of have to keep this set up. I actually just go to do something else. This was on this crank at the time, and I see the wheel move independently of the crank, and I was like, oh, that's a problem. Like, this is the pickup. This is what tells the ignition where you're at in your rotation, and if this has movement, it's like adjusting your timing while it's driving. This thing is going back and forth and back and forth. Then when it moves independently of this, it's a real mess. Then the brain has no idea where the crank is at any point. And two things we were experiencing. The motor was not advancing because it couldn't rev to save its life. Another thing, whoever wired this up, the genius had the choke and your idle cutoff circuit here, or your fuel cutoff circuit there, grounded to the engine. These are both key power. The choke is adjusted shut, and there was no power coming here to heat the element up. It never opened up the choke. So when this gentleman has been driving this car, he's been driving it with the choke closed the entire time. So I can imagine this thing was probably horrendous to drive. Zero power. So once I saw that this was moving independent, I dug deeper. I barely touched the crank bolt, it's loose. That's a problem. So you see, as the serpentine belt, this is what we're looking at on the backside of this dude right here. This keyway, that little bit that they give you right there, it's not much at all. That little bit has to index into the remaining keyway that's not being used by the crankshaft. Seems like a pretty legit idea. This is the adapter to make it go to the serpentine setup, because you need the additional depth here for the sensor to come out further, for the spacing of the additional serpentine, all that malarkey that goes with it. That keyway is completely blown out of that. It's not even there anymore. Little nub of it. This keyway is blown out on both sides from the movement of this thing just going back and forth. And I would assume that's got to be a pretty significant amount of degrees when you're talking about this. You might be adjusting your timing 20 to 30 degrees in that bit of movement you're getting there. A simple thing like a crank bolt coming loose is what caused a no-run situation in a vehicle. Secondary problems was the wiring was incorrect. From someone just didn't take the time to look up a standard diagram available on the samba.com. It has every wiring diagram out there, and it would have showed him how to wire up this carburetor. 12 volt power goes to your carburetor, not a ground. So needless to say, we're going to be doing a tune-up on this as best I can after I just get it back to a running condition. I will correct this so the choke functions and works, and I'll get the carburetor adjusted. We're going to change plugs, valve covers. We're going to go underneath and check that out. In the VW aftermarket world, being a mechanic, it's not all fun and games. This is why I want to vet cars I work on first. This is a black hole that has sucked me in because I'm here on a Saturday trying to get this done. We got to put in extra time, figure this out, get this thing to run again, and hopefully run well. Wait till you see the valve covers. They're absolute insanity. Not only do they leak like a sieve, look how long that stud that sticks out, and look how little room I have here for that to move forward. So these should be pretty interesting to remove from the vehicle. I got stock bales. If I pull it off, and we got stock rockers underneath there that are just solid shaft or something, no big ratio rockers or anything like that, we're gonna go back to stock bales on these. So we discussed the fact that you get the movement just in that little keyway right there. Let's add this to the mix. That's moving independent of the crank right there. That additional movement, this one was off the rails at a time. That right there, in conjunction with the movement of the wheel separate, because that was blown out, easy 30 degrees of movement, if not more, and I'm gonna go for more on that one. So we're gonna do a compression test on it also before we get too deep into tuning anything. We're gonna do that stuff first. corrective work going on here. Missing hardware from this side. This side's loose. This doesn't have any hardware holding it in. It doesn't fit very well, but we're not gonna worry about that. I am gonna put that hardware on since I am changing the pulley, and obviously I'll clean behind that. So now I gotta get that dude off, clean everything up, and we'll start putting the new parts on. So I have this on, but it's not tight yet. But I mean minimal, absolute minimal play now, because the keyway indexes into the pulley keyway. We got the proper length hardware on there, 40 millimeter in length, to put that crank position sensor on there. So you see, once you get a little bit of slack, that thing moves. So pulley's on there and it's bedded all the way down. We're just gonna go look at an example of how bad that was before, because this is what was indexing into that train wreck right there. So let's see, that much play. Now that we dry fit it and it works, I'm going to put some Loctite on that dude, get it all cleaned up before we install it. Show you where I left off on this one here. New lower pulleys installed, new upper pulleys installed, V-belt cog the way we like it. We removed the serpentine spacer here and removed the damaged serpentine spacer there that was allowing this to move independently. This is now locked into that pulley. This pulley also does not have the same side-to-side play, but this one fits nice and snug. This fits snug, so I think we're going to get a really nice reading off of that dude right there. I've gone and actually wired up the choke and the idle cutoff circuit to keyed power. We had to replace a piece of hardware there. I don't have the same style he had, but we put that dude on there. I still got to put plugs in this guy and then see if we can do anything about that valve adjustment. This is pretty nuts. This is a vacuum that goes all the way to the ignition box under the seat, because it's a boost sensitive timing unit. I don't know if this is even necessary. Maybe I might have to call CB on that, because obviously I wouldn't hand instructions with this dude. They do have some stuff online, extremely vague. Hopefully this dude fires up and drives well. Camera's picking it up, but I always look to see, because this one was giving me trouble hand threading in, and I always make sure that it looks centered. You can tell when a spark plug is not screwed in properly, so I make sure it's centered before I even bring a ratchet onto it. This is the only one that gave me any issues, and I know why, because that wiring right there, people have probably jacked the threads that start that plug, but we got her on. Take your time. If something is fighting you, don't fight back, find out what's wrong with it and get it in there right. I actually got it to fire up, but the fuel pump's not working now, so now I got to diagnose that. So we had to go back to the no-run situation. The electric fuel pump was not working. So track down to, so I got my power probe out. I highly recommend getting one of these. If you're a retard at wiring like I am, these make it very simple. Tracked it down to second fuse. There was the fuel pump and it was blown. This apparently is a switch that turns the fuel pump on. So she now runs. Let's see if she fires up. Yep, a little bit of gas. For a bit. I'd assume that's why it took a minute to fire. All right, so now we know it runs. So I'm going to put a fan underneath it, start cooling that motor off. We're going to put it up in the air and see about doing those valves. It's par for the course every time a new Volkswagen comes in here that I haven't messed with, that they are just riddled with problems. The way that people work on these cars, they're very DIY, and unfortunately it shows sometimes because not every DIY does a good job. A lot of DIYs just do and don't do it properly. I can guarantee it never ran well. Now it seems to rev up very nicely. I put a timing light on it. I was a little nervous about that because of the fact I don't have a laptop to tune this. So I was wondering what I was going to run into. When I first fired up, she ran a little rough and she seemed to self-correct. I'm not sure if it's meant to do that, but I put a timing light on it. I'm at 10 at idle and running about 28 to 30 at full advance. So it seems right on the money, and I actually moved that right there. Like, I actually moved this thing. I had to take it off. I had a little marking where it was, but how accurate can my mark be when it's moved in and side to side from where it was? But she fired up. So shout out to CB. If that thing self-corrects, it did a great job of doing so. All right, now I'm gonna get it up in the air and start looking at them valves. All right, so here's the number one issue I'm running in right now. You can see that to clearance the valve cover just to clear the body, and there is a 1/2 inch of stud sticking out of there. I'm gonna give it a shot and see on the other side where I have more room to work with, and this one is leaking so profusely something needs to be done about it. I'm gonna try and get this one off, and if I'm successful removing this one, then I'll give a shot at the other one. So we got some really nice CB rockers, some chromoly push rods in there. Magnet sticks to the push rod. That's a clear indicator that it's steel and not aluminum like an original one. The CBs have CB logo on the rockers themselves, and they are most likely a ratio rocker. We got dual springs on this motor. It's got the nice Porsche swivel foot adjusters. So it's got some really good stuff on here. Unfortunately, the valve cover down here, this seal is leaking like a pig. They got it covered in RTV. There were no O-rings, rubber washes, anything at all on the contact points. We are going to put some stock baling valve covers back on this guy. So I'm gonna let it cool off and we're gonna deal with that. Now I gotta actually see if the other side has the same luck. The beauty of it was, as I was turning this one, the stud came out. So I'm hoping I get the same luck on the other side because it does not have as much clearance as this side had. This had about a 1/2 inch of clearance. The other side over there is right on the body. They literally cut the valve cover to clearance the body. So if I got a double nut to get the studs off, at least I know they're being held on by those big retaining nuts right there. And we'll swap these out for regular hardware. But this is some really nice, it looks like the geometry set up well. It's got good components, so that's nice. And if you look at the condition of this engine, you'd never guess it by looking at it. It looks like a real piece of junk. The owner told me that this did have a supercharger on it. So in order to have a supercharger on it, you'd hope they'd have some good product back in it, and it looks like they really did. So I just want to point out, like, just look at the amount of neglect that this poor bug has going on right now. I mean, it is insanely oily underneath here. Both axle boots leak. Both wheel seals leak. Guaranteed this gearbox is probably damn near empty because all the gear was on the outside, keeping it preserved there. That sump looks filthy. Who knows if it's sealed up properly? Probably is. I'd assume that 95% of this is gear oil. But when I see these valve covers leaking this bad, I see the push rod tube just covered. That's most likely gear oil on those from the source. It's coming from the middle. There's not leaks in the middle there. They would be really wet along here if it was the seals leaking. I mean, they could be leaking out at this point. You would never know, just because of how much oil is on everything. So this is why when you see me take my motor out and stuff like that, I clean it really well so I can identify leak sources immediately. Yeah, everything is only as good as the maintenance done to it, and this is horrible. I mean, you see a physical trail going down here of gear oil. Look how wet that bottom of that is. Nuts. And every one of these dudes, every one of them dripping. I got one valve cover off. We gotta drop this exhaust. Look at this fancy strap they put on that dude. That's because this dude has seen the road a couple times when it wasn't supposed to. So I gotta take, there's like a Torx bit up there I gotta get off, loosen the 3 at the front and drop the muffler out of the way so I can mess with that valve cover there. So we got that dude off of there, and I can see already that we got a lot of lash going on here. For something with chrome ollies on it, that is a lot of lash. So I'm gonna put the fan on this dude, I'm gonna let it cool off, and when I come back we will be doing these valves. Do you think that valve cover's been leaking for a while? It's pretty nice. All right, so we got that off. Yeah, that is just a filthy mess of a motor. So they're 1:5 ratios. You can see that 1:5 right there. At least it has a nice valve train setup in it. I can say that, and hopefully it was set up well. So hopefully this motor was built by somebody who knew what they were doing. When I see this, the answer to that is no, they don't. When you have those oil filters on, that's trash. Full flow your motors, people. Got those valve covers changed. I adjusted the valve, so we're putting this muffler back up. We have a new oil filter on it, and this valve cover changed as well. And I just pulled the drain plug that someone had made. It's like an NPT fitting there. I just pulled that and drained that oil out. The oil actually didn't seem too bad, surprisingly, but that's because it's probably being refilled with as much as coming out of it. I was stoked with what I saw on those valve covers. That's always nice when you get a little bonus like that. So this thing should rip. It should really rip when it gets going again. I'm gonna button this suit up. I'm gonna put some oil in it and fire it up, and maybe even test drive it right now. Forgive me for this audio. We're on the media mod right now. It does not sound as good as my Shure microphone. Shout out to Dave Grunvig. I'm gonna be taking this one back to the owner. Got it running, it's driving, but you saw in the video it has all that valve train upgrade on it, And one of the issues when you see all that valve train upgrade is people don't do that for a stock camshaft, and this is running a 34 pick 3 carburetor. It has a lot of trouble idling on a stock carburetor. You got to make it so fat, it's unbelievable. So I got that screw out. If anybody's familiar with these things, I probably got it out 6 or 7 turns, the mixture screw, which is insane for this thing to even hold an idle. I've taken the carb out, I've gone through it. I can't find anything. There's no intake leaks. I've checked for all that stuff. Timing is showing 10 at idle. It advanced all the way. It only looks like it's hitting 28, but 28 should be plenty as far as I'm concerned for that thing to idle. So I don't think it's an ignition issue. I think the fact that it's a cammed motor running on a stock carburetor, that's a big problem. So I've told the customer, I said, invest in some 40s. You don't need to get crazy. Just set a, either HPMXs or Webers. Get those dudes on there, and it's going to make a world of difference in the performance. Because I tell you what, when she's actually off idle, once you get past all the sloppiness, the thing rips. It's actually smooth as silk. There's no vibration coming through there. Somebody put some money in that thing, and they did a nice job building that motor. Now we just got to get it back to where it was. So we're going to drive this right now. Alright, so we got the sucker here at the house. That was a white knuckle drive. This thing is super low. The front wheels have way too much play in the bearings. The brakes are a little sketch just because they're saturating gear oil. But we got it here. It ran great the entire way. This thing actually has great power. I think when it gets to the 40s on it, this thing's going to absolutely rip. It's a super clean bug too. I mean, really nice. You just pick this thing up and it's beautiful. This dude right here, you hit 70 miles an hour, it screams at you for some reason. Super, super loud. Successful job as far as like, it runs now. Showed up at my shop at a no run, so now she's running. We're happy with it. When we do the upgrades, I'll take you guys on that journey too. We're going to be changing out the mounts on the transmission because I just realized they're broken. We're going to be doing upgrades to the gearbox. Probably pull the axles off and put one-piece boots on it. Once I learn how to do that, it seems useless to put the two-piece on if I'm pulling the gearbox anyways. Change mounts, go about it that way. Redo the wheel seals on it, get the front end dialed in, and hopefully putting some 40s and some Berg linkage on that motor, and this thing's gonna it's gonna scoot once we do that to it. So all right boys, I will talk to y'all later.